Welcome to Board Buzz, where we break down the Ramapo and Indian Hills Board of Education meetings. I'm Cynthia Phillips.
I'm Philomena LaForgia from Oakland, and also I'm a former board member. We are recapping the reorganization meeting from January 5th, 2023 at Ramapo High School.
Before we begin, I just wanted to address two sort of house cleaning items related to some information that's been going around on social media and some confusion and misinformation. And it's really just two small things. The first was about who creates the agenda. So the Board of Education does not create the agenda. The superintendent of school does, right, Phil?
Correct. So typically the superintendent gets information from the administrative heads, anything related for the board to vote on or consider. And then obviously his office puts it all together for the board agenda packet for the board members to vote on.
Exactly. And then the second item was something about teacher dress codes. There was a lot of concern and a little bit of outrage over a dress code policy for teachers. So I just want to say that the policy was created by the previous board's policy committee, led by Vivian Uden King, in response to a dress code policy for students. Did I get that right?
Yeah, so Vivian was chair of policy last year. I think what sparked this was that there was a dress code for the students that was revised by the chair, by the policy committee, Vivian King. And so I think what brought the conversation forward is that if we're going to address dress codes for students, teachers don't have a dress code. So I think that moved it to the forefront. But this is an item that technically should probably go through the union and the settlement contract. And I think at one point, Mrs. Sullivan asked Dr. Denisio if that was the case. And if I recall correctly, he said that he did go through the union. Everybody was okay with it. So this was an outcome of, I think, that initial conversation with students and dress codes.
Exactly. So we just wanted to clarify that for everybody because it really seemed to be kind of a bone of contention and confusion.
Yeah.
So the other thing I wanted to address is that if you're going to watch the entire live archived video, just know that the whole first half of the meeting has extensive audio issues. There's video lag. I don't know what happened, but it was difficult. So we're not going to even be looking at that because it's just not possible to follow.
Yeah, but we still recommend you watch it.
Well, it's got its issues, but yes. All right. So at the January 5th, 2023 reorganization meeting, they kicked it off with the swearing in of the three new board members. So Tom Bogdansky and Doreen Mariani from Wyckoff were joined with their families. And Kim Anch is from Franklin Lakes, and she was joined by her family. And Brian DeLate was already on the dais, and apparently he was sworn in before in private at the board office. And we don't know if he was with his family, but he was already sworn in.
Exactly. So we'll go straight to what happens, right? The board came in with some motions. There were some disruptions throughout the board meeting. Vivian herself has spoken in the past about disruptors. She was one of the people that was very vocal at this meeting. So was Helen Cordes. And I must say, Dr. Lorenz. So the people that maybe have lost favor in the board or the majority had a lot to say about the changes. But, this is the process of change. It's growing pains, and change happened. And there's a new a new majority rule.
And the biggest change for the board was the appointment of a new president and vice president. So Judy Sullivan was voted as the new president, and Kim Anch was voted as the new vice president.
Correct. There were two other nominations. Dr. Lorenz got a nomination for president. He also got a nomination for vice president. And surprisingly enough, Mr. DeLate voted for Tom Bogdansky for president, but later voted for Dr. Lorenz. So that was an odd exchange, but
yeah, I didn't get that either.
Needless to say, nevertheless, Mrs. Sullivan is president, Kim Anch is vice president, which, by the way, I think is a good. I think it's good because Franklin Lakes has been underrepresented in an executive position for as long as I can remember. So good for her.
Yeah, that is. It's good for her, and that's really, again, fair and balanced. I think that's great.
Yeah.
Before we move on, though, I just want to take a moment to talk about, just for a second, about the disruptions. So anybody who's seen the board, attended or watched the board meeting or is following things on social media, there's a lot of conversation about disruptions and all of that. I will tell you that, to be honest, the disruptions really came from Vivian Newton King, which is really a normal course of business with her, with how she behaves on the board. And in the past, I often have said and felt that she really steamrolled over John Carolyn, the former board president. And it was often uncomfortable, to be perfectly honest with you. So this new board president, Mrs. Sullivan, made it really clear that she is not going to tolerate that behavior. And she used Robert's rules to maintain control and order of that meeting. And it's worth mentioning too that by the end of the meeting, right? It was a very long meeting, but by the end of the meeting, the dust settled. Things went back to a normal kind of orderly fashion. Everybody was asking questions. Questions were listened. They made changes to agenda items. So the whole thing kind of smoothed out towards the end. And that was good to see. And I hope it's, a reflection of what we're going to see in the future.
So Judy is going to follow Robert's rules to the T. She is a veteran in the board. She knows the rules. She knows how to interpret it. We've said it 100 times. She's a lawyer. She will follow those rules to a T with no disruption. And so everybody's going to have to either learn the rules as well and follow them, or she's going to call them out on it, right? And she's also the parliamentarian, which means basically that she is the person that will tell you the rules. She will follow the rules, and she will.
And how many times have we heard Vivian say to constituents and other board members, questions are to be referred to the board president. Questions are to be referred to Mr. Carolyn. I mean, how many times did we hear that?
Listen, the nicest thing I could say about Vivian King is that she is a bold personality and she wants to be heard. Kudos, but she still has to follow the rules.
Absolutely. So, all that being said, let's jump to the really important part of this board meeting, because amazing things happened. And the most important things were the motions that were introduced and the changes and updates to the agenda. That's what we're going to focus on, because that's what matters.
Okay, let's dive right in. First motion, right?
Yep. First motion was by Kim Anch at 30 minutes and 9 seconds. And it was about having legal counsel at every meeting. And let's just cut to that.
I'd like to make a motion to revise policy 0174 on first read. If anyone would like copies, I have copies.
So there's that lag that we were talking about.
Whereas the board wishes to revise policy 0174, legal services, to include the following changes. Paragraph 2, delete the following words: superintendent of schools designee, school business administrator, board secretary, or designee, and/or. Also, paragraph 2, make contact person singular. Paragraph 3, make contact person singular. Paragraph 4, delete. Whereas board policy 0131, bylaws and policies, requires new policies to be submitted and approved by the Board of Education on the first and second reading, and whereas the board wishes to revise board policy 0174 on a first reading, now therefore be it resolved that the Ramapo Indian Hills Regional High School District Board.
So this is one of those areas where there's just really bad audio, but the long and the short of revising board policy 0174 was to reduce legal fees at Board of Ed meetings. It is not necessary to require to have legal counsel at every meeting, And in the past, board counsel was never present at every meeting. So basically, Kim's motion said that we do not need to have legal counsel at every meeting. And I kind of agree with her.
Right, so they voted, so that's what they moved forward. Legal counsel doesn't have to be there at every meeting. It is the board president's purview. It was a little awkward considering Mr. Fogarty was sitting there. And then what ensued was a conversation again, or, the disruption between, I think it was Vivian, Helen, and Dr. Lorenz. They protested. They were questioned whether that was the right thing to do. We have to have legal. I think this is a place where people are just not educated or don't know of the past. Typically, I mean, I was on the board 3 years. 2 years of that, the legal hardly ever showed up. The only reason he showed up was in executives to talk about legal matters. He did not, the legal didn't sit there and answer questions from the board and went back and forth. It just wasn't what was done. It was only post-COVID that it was like basically a handicap. I have to be honest with you. The legal was treated as a handicap, as this person that they could bounce off ideas. That's not what legal is for.
Well said. It's, this particular episode, we're really going to benefit from your being the past president, because you're really going to give us the actual inside facts, that it's not, it's not like my opinion, like you were there.
Yeah. Well, Mr. Fogarty, when I was president, Mr. Fogarty was not at every meeting. He was not. So.
Well stated. So that was motion number 1. Now let's move on to motion number 2. That was at 38 minutes, 19 seconds, and it was made by Doreen Mariani. And her motion was to remove the scheduled board ethics training and board self-evaluation and CSI evaluation sessions from that night's agenda.
Yeah, so apparently Dr. Denisio had both Mr. Fogarty having a session on board ethics, and then Mr. Lee, who's from the school board, have another one with school ethics and stuff back to back. Those are lengthy presentations. It would have been, I mean, as it is, I think it was a 3-hour meeting, and it was an important reorganization meeting. So I think that was a good call, because it's a lot to absorb, and those are important materials. I agreed with that. The meeting was too long, and they can do it at another time. And they're often done at another time. They're not traditionally done on the reorg.
I was just going to say that, because I remember last year, I mean, I went to pretty much every meeting, and I think they did them like in March and April. Because I remember thinking it's like April and they're doing
yeah, right.
Now, right. As I've been on the board since January, I remember thinking like that was an odd thing, Yeah. So clearly it didn't have to happen tonight. And at a reorganization meeting, I mean, that's poor planning at best.
Listen, it's going to happen. It just didn't need to happen that night. And they did. They said no.
Well, I thought that was perfect. So the third motion was also made by Doreen Mariani, and this was made after they came back from executive session. So you will find that at 2 hours and 49 minutes, and that was regarding changing policy 0164.
So after Doreen makes her motion, the board is scheduled to go into executive session. But Mr. Madigan, the new mayor of Wyckoff, presents himself and basically asks Mrs. Sullivan to acknowledge him before they go into executive session, which Mrs. Sullivan does do. He goes on to give a very nice warm welcome to the new board members and wishes everyone luck. And a few more people come and do the same, follow his lead. Unfortunately, the audio is so bad that we really can't share it, but it was a positive moment. And right after that, Judy Sullivan calls for a motion to go into executive, and they do. They go off for about an hour, I would say an hour and 15 minutes, and then they come back and we'll start from there. And now you can see the dais has changed a little bit. Judy resumes her seat next to Dr. Denisio, and Kim Anch resumes her seat next to her. And so we start with a new motion, correct?
Yes. So the third motion of the evening was introduced by Doreen Mariani, and that was 2 hours and 49 minutes, more or less. and it's regarding changing policy number 0164. And I really want everybody to hear this one.
Okay. I think the audio is better too, right?
Yeah, we can actually hear this.
Ms. Sullivan, may I be recognized?
Yes, Ms. Marianne?
I'd like to make a motion on item number 15 on the agenda, and I'm asking the board to approve this change on a one read only, which is tonight. I want to amend policy 0164. I'm proposing the following changes. Number 1, regarding agenda. The agenda shall be delivered to each board member no later than remove 48 hours and replace it with 5 calendar days before the meeting, and shall include remove such reports and supplements materials, remove as are appropriate and available, and add in parentheses commonly defined as board packet. Number 2, in order of business, remove on agenda items following public comment. And then number 3 would be remove on agenda and no agenda items from board comments and move to follow public comment before adjournment. I have examples.
Thank you. That would be helpful.
So basically, what she's requesting is that instead of the board members receiving their board packet 48 hours before a meeting, that they receive it 5 days prior to the meeting. And, you know, we've been through a lot of these meetings. I mean, the one in November, Mariana Emilo had made a point that they got their board packet the night before Thanksgiving break. And in addition to the regular board packet, which has so many items, there was like 1,000 pages of contracts for the ESIP. I mean, 1,000 pages. So I don't know. That makes perfect sense to me that 5 days is, you know, pretty reasonable given the amount of materials that they have to read. And then the second item was changing the public's ability to comment on agenda and non-agenda items whenever they want.
So the second part of that revoked back to last year, prior to last year, right? Where the public was outraged. And why can't we speak on any agenda and non-agenda items before the second public session? And they went right back to it, because guess what? It really didn't work last year. So why not give the public an opportunity to speak when they can at the beginning and not wait until 10 o'clock to say so? And I would add, and that was the argument I made last year, if someone needs to speak on, if the public needs to speak on an agenda item, well, the public is conscientious and respectful enough. You could see behind the scenes that says, are you going? Are you going? I'll go next. What is your topic? So it's very self-regulated. There was never a problem, nothing to be fixed. We went back to where everybody's happy. The other part of that is, again, from my purview as a former board member, this has been what every board member has ever wanted: more time to read, more time to absorb this stuff, more time. And it's not unreasonable. I can tell you that the administration and Dr. Denisio did voice that it would be a tremendous strain on the administration to meet those deadlines. But I don't know, Cynthia, you have been in production. I have been in production. You set a timeline and everybody goes back, okay? You set a timeline and everybody works backwards. It's just a new date and time, and everybody should work backwards. And quite frankly, last minute things are used in addendum items. That's what addendum items are: last minute, unforeseen things.
Yeah, I mean, anybody in the business world knows you just plan ahead. What's my deadline? And then you back into that day. It's just sort of adjusting your workflow.
Exactly.
Yeah, he definitely pushed back on that, and we'll see where it ends up. And I think at the end, Judy said, if it doesn't work out or if it poses too much of a
we'll
challenge,
revisit it.
that they would be open to revisiting it. But to me, it's like a normal order of business. What's my deadline? And I'm going to plan ahead.
Yeah, exactly.
So, I don't know.
Well, we'll see.
Yes. And then the next motion was really interesting. Motion number 4 occurs at 3 hours and 2 minutes and 14 seconds. And that was introduced by Tom Bogdansky. he makes a motion to pause the ESIP. That's the Energy Savings Improvement Plan that we've been talking about. So let's watch Tom.
I would like to make a motion to pause our work on the ESIP because 7 board members voted for the approval and 3 of those board members are no longer on the board. Today, we have 4 new board members who have not had the opportunity to review all the information and contracts, and they want input because it falls under our preview.
So what happens there is Mr. Bodansky says, let's pause on the ESIP, which wasn't that different than the narrative that was being told last year, that the constituents were saying, listen, you got 4 new board members coming on board. Can you put a pause? But the last board did barrel through and approve it. So now these are the repercussions from when you're not listening to the constituency. And what he said, though, he said, not that we're not doing it. He said, pause. I want to come up to speed. My 3 other fellow new board members want to do so as well. And so that's what that was about. Mr. Lamb did express very big concern about it. They also said that this wasn't specifically an agenda item, which is correct. It wasn't an agenda item because they passed it last year. But this was a definite position where they said, we told you to do this. We told you to hold on until we get here so we could understand it. And you didn't. And this is a result of not listening to your constituents. The constituents that put the new at least three board members in play. And these 3 board members heard the cries of the constituents.
And it wasn't just a few constituents. I mean, in Wyckoff, we had a record-breaking number of voters who voted for Board of Education. I mean, it was a huge number. So they listened to the constituents, and I thought it was a really good move. There was a lot of pushback, as you can imagine, and we don't have the time to go through all of that because it's a kind of a long, lengthy back and forth. But in the end, it passed, and these board members, they have a lot of catching up to do because that is a huge project with a lot of moving parts. So good for them for, being transparent and wanting to really understand what they're involved with.
Right. And honestly, this is not a bashing of the motion. This is more of a criticism of the past board. Why did they move such an important decision forward with such haste? This is really more reflective of the old board than the new board.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I totally agree with you. So motion number 5 was introduced at 3 hours and 8 minutes and 30 seconds. And this was one from Kim Anch, and this was regarding the renewal of the contract for Fogarty and Hara, who are our general counsel law firm. Let's listen to Kim.
Be recognized, Mrs.
Yes, Ms. Anch?
I'd like to make a motion on agenda item 18. The renewal of Fogarty and Hara. I would like to amend agenda item 18 to limit the retention and appointment of Fogarty and Hara's firm for 30 days only in order to close their files, provide closing memos, notify the courts of their withdrawal, and ask for adjournments to allow time for the board to find new counsel.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Any questions or comment?
I have a question, Ms. Sullivan.
Mr. Lawrence?
Ms. Anch, we're going to find counsel in 30 days. We're going to find new counsel in 30 days.
You can direct your question to me.
I'm asking Ms. Anch, she's a fellow board member.
I can answer your, under Robert's rules, you direct all the questions to me.
Can you ask Ms. Anch if we're going to find counsel in 30 days?
We can. We can do that.
Can you ask Ms. Anch if we're going to find counsel in 30 days?
No, I'm not going to ask Ms. Anch that question.
So you get to decide the questions that I get to ask fellow board members?
Yes, under our rules, you direct all your questions to me. If you like, I can offer it to her, but I don't think.
Right, so you're making the determination about what questions I can ask fellow board members.
It says in Robert's rules and in our policies that you direct your questions to me, and then I choose who gets to answer the question. In that case, I'm answering the question myself.
Okay, well, I'm extremely concerned that this leaves us open to liability
Thank you.
and makes us incredibly vulnerable. And everyone watching at home should pay attention to what's happening right now.
Excuse me, don't interrupt the board member when they're speaking.
I'm just trying to understand how we can have a seasoned 3-decade attorney who happens to be one of the top school board attorneys be asked to remove his things in 30 days so we can find a new lawyer. I'm sorry, I do not agree with Ms. Ansch, and I do not know if the new board members are really aware of what they are about to vote on. I ask you and I urge you to please stop and think about your decision. What you're asking him is really not realistic. Who are you gonna find that's better, especially in 30 days?
Thank you, Ms. Villa-Curtis. Any other comments, questions?
So this next interaction is pretty lengthy, so we're going to do our best to summarize it. Basically, the board members' comments and concerns revolved around, is the district open to litigation? Can we find a lawyer in 30 days? And what was the rationale? So first and foremost, the district was not at risk and is not at risk at all because Fogarty and Hara are still in place for the next 30 days. The contract was not canceled. It was just not renewed. And they expressed a 30-day window to put together an RFQ and find new representation. It's important to note that they also said that the RFQ would include not just general counsel, but they want specialty attorneys to handle certain types of situations. So I know that they mentioned like labor attorneys for negotiations, special education attorneys for those items, which I think makes a lot of sense. You know, general counsel can't really handle everything well. The second thing that was really important was we learned that Ramapo and Indian Hills has one of the highest rates of legal fees per student and the second highest in the county in general for legal fees. So that was pretty shocking to me. I was not aware of that. And then lastly, we also learned that this was not like a new circumstance. Apparently, there was an RFQ that was started in 2021 by the old board, but it just wasn't completed. So apparently,
Well,
a new item.
That was me. I started that RFQ, and yes, it was never completed. So therefore, it's still open and can be used. So I'm going to make this one pretty brief. It was a passionate outcry from the old board members or the board members that obviously are aligned with Mr. Fogarty. But this is a moment you pull off the Band-Aid, okay? Mrs. Koulikotis talks about 3 decades. Well, you know what? It's time. Personally, it's time. It's time for new blood. You know, there's also disadvantage of having the same person in place for so long as well. You need new eyeballs. That's what I think happened here. And I think that I, for one, as a constituent, welcome that. This is not anything against Mr. Fogarty. I just think the time has come for this board to look for new attorneys. And like you said, perhaps specialty attorney. I did want to comment on what Mrs. Koulikotis said. It reminds me of a part in Hamlet by a character. Let me see, I forgot her character's name, but I'm going to find it. Queen Gertrude. And what she says is, the lady thou protest too much, methinks it. Right? So, and what it really means, the phrase is used in everyday speech to indicate doubt of someone's truth, of strong denial. I just, you know what, it was dramatic. And I think that it is just time. And for her to protest, I found it to be too personal. There was no reason to protest in that sense, in that passionate plea. It puts a lot of doubt in my mind.
Now, I hear what you're saying. It kind of, it stood out to me as well. So now, immediately after this, motion number 6 was put forth, and that was Kim Anch at 3 hours and 13 minutes and 45 seconds, where she puts a motion to reopen and restart that RFQ process that was started and not completed in 2021 to obtain labor counsel, special education counsel, and general counsel. So basically, they want to finish the job that the old board had started and didn't complete.
Yep, all for it.
So immediately after that exchange, motion number 7 is introduced at 3 hours, 15 minutes, and 30 seconds by Kim Anch. Basically, the motion was to not authorize having police officers at every board meeting as there are no special risks involved. And so there was a whole back and forth on, whether you should have it or not have it. She gave her rationale why she attended all these. She's been attending pretty much every board meeting and has been asking that question over and over again, and no one would answer her. And so,
well, she created the answer, right? That's
Yeah.
what happens. Again, this is another one of those moments where for a year you had a constituent telling you, asking you, begging you to clarify why this is happening. And it fell on deaf ears. There was no opining. There was no rationale. There was nothing, right? And now, again, her constituents talked. They put her in as an elected official, and she addressed it in her capacity now. And guess what? Who came questioning the motion? Dr. Lorenz, Helen Kula-Cordes, Vivian King, all the regular players. Well, they had a whole year to respond to her, to the rationale, and they were mute. And last night and the other night, they wanted to know why, and they were giving her reasons. Well, too little, too late, in my opinion. And there is no need for them.
But they didn't really give her reasons. They were just challenging her. They didn't give her reasons. And when they asked her to clarify, her rationale was, our students do not have armed police at school every day. So why do board members have to have armed police officers at every board meeting? What was not mentioned was that we have 2 security guards at every meeting. They're big, they're qualified, they're very good at what they do. And so if somebody feels, whatever, and you got 2 guys, they're great.
Yeah. I think this is another one of those, we got used to something, we're not going to live without it, and it's wrong. Again, none of the previous board meetings, there was never security, there was never police.
I know, we've been to all of them. I've never seen anything.
There's never been an incident, and it's just,
And they
I get it.
2 security guards. It's not like there's nobody there. You have 2 security guards at every meeting.
And you got to create the environment that this is an exchange, okay? When there is also, people talk about it. If you have police there, that might even aggravate the situation, right? If you show a back and forth, a social exchange, a community that gives and takes, there's no need for that kind of stuff.
So that passed. Motion number 8 was introduced by Judy Sullivan at 3 hours, 22 minutes. It was a motion to approve committees. We now have policy committee, negotiations, education and personnel, facilities and finance, arts, athletics, extracurricular communications, and then an ad hoc committee for the RFQ to secure new legal counsel.
Yeah. So Mrs. Sullivan did come prepared to announce the committees. One of them that stood out for me was negotiation. That was one that's going to be important this year because the teacher's contract is due in June. She placed Dr. Lorenz as the chair of that committee. And I also think she included Vivian King, which makes sense because she was in the last negotiation. So we'll see. Everybody's participating in some way. And that's a good thing because last year, Mrs. Sullivan and Mariana Amala were kind of sidelined from committees. So I think
I know definitely Judy was sidelined, which I thought was very odd.
But she's including everybody.
Yes. And guess what? It was approved unanimously.
There you go.
They can work together.
Yeah, there you go. Okay, next motion, number 9, right?
Yep, number 9. Marianne Emelo introduced motion number 9 at 3 hours and 26 minutes and 20 seconds. It was a motion to amend the board meeting calendar and to change the location of the meetings to a smaller venue to make the meetings more community friendly. The locations proposed were the Ramapo Media Center and the Indian Hills Wellness Center. So we don't, we're not going to cut to that because that was really lengthy because they went through like all the different dates. But long and the short, I thought it was an interesting proposal. I think that board meetings used to take place in a smaller venue, and I totally
Absolutely.
get where she's going with that. And I think she's right. When she used the word community friendly, it really struck me like that's a good call. It is community.
Yeah.
It's not like this us and them.
Exactly. Exactly. It's the foundation. Yeah, absolutely. I agree. It's the
Called
foundation.
meeting,
Yeah.
right?
Yep, it's absolutely. We were in a small, the small room in the board office. It was intimate. It was welcoming. It said to the community, "Come on in." And even when we had more people showing up for the board meeting, we all fit in. We knew it was a community. It was like a big room with tons of people in it, and it's okay. I think it was a great motion. This is so formal. This is so impersonal. You can't see people's faces. You can't hear them. You can't engage. I thought it was a very thoughtful observation after a year of sitting up there.
Yeah, well done, Mariana. Judy Sullivan introduces motion number 10. And this motion is a consent for agenda, or she makes a consent for agenda, including tabling item number P11. This is one of the items that fueled a great deal of concern and confusion with the public and on social media. And I want to show you why, and then I'm going to read you P11. So let's see where this drama came from.
Move to approve the amendment to the collective negotiations agreement for stipends. And a second.
Second.
Any questions?
I have a question.
Ms. King?
Is there a reason why you don't want our teachers to be paid for their time and the job that they're doing?
I knew you would say that, Ms. King.
Should the teachers not be paid?
That's not what I'm saying. I'm just making a motion to table it. I'm not permitted to really say the reasons because it's personnel.
But you're asking to table them getting a stipend for work that they've already done.
I didn't say that they wouldn't get paid. I'm just saying that it's to be tabled.
You're asking that they not get paid. Thank you.
I did not say that.
So
Cynthia, so Judy goes into a motion for consent agenda, and that consent agenda is just a fancy term to say we're going to add all the agenda items together and vote at once. But she does pull out P11, this one specifically. You could speak on that, right?
yes. So what's fascinating to me is that the board has this in their hand. They can read P11, and P11 clearly.
By the way, P starts with, it's a P because it's personnel.
Got it.
That's why it's P. So it's P11 of personnel number 11.
So, and it says, whereas the board is engaged in the development of a strategic plan to communicate the organization's goals and priorities needed to achieve those goals and metrics used to measure progress on the goals for both academic and operational aspects of the school district. And whereas high school assistant principals Daniel Guido and Mariette NG have assumed the responsibilities of chairpersons for strategic planning and steering committee. Whereas the board wishes to recognize the role and the leadership of these administrators have made as chairpersons to the strategic planning committee, they will be awarded $7,000 non-pensionable stipend for their additional responsibilities. Does that sound like teachers to you?
No, this is a clear example where Mrs. King is propagating some misinformation. This is not about teachers. It's not about teachers getting paid. It's about two administrative, the vice principals getting a $7,000 stipend each for doing the strategic planning. Now, I've never seen an agenda item before that will pay additional money for participating in the strategic planning. I'm just assuming that it just had a lot of red flags to it. And therefore, tabling means that I don't understand it entirely. We haven't discussed it completely. I just want to hold off until I totally understand it before I put it forth in front of my board. It's not a terrible thing. And she did not say that she wasn't going to honor it. She just said they're tabling it. So we're about to wrap it up. The board goes into the second public session. We get a bunch of people that do come up and talk about tonight's board meeting, the decorum, some of the disruption and the outbursts, questioning some of the exchanges and what occurred back and forth in dialogue. But I think we should end off with one of the new board members and their comments.
Absolutely. I definitely want to cut to Doreen Mariani, who makes a pretty noteworthy comment. She does clarify, somebody questioned her on why she changed her vote. So she clarifies that for the public, and then she moves on to her comment. So let's check out Doreen.
Can I be recognized?
Yes,
Is that
Ms.
okay?
Mariani.
Okay. I just want to clarify, having this be the first meeting, it's a little bit of a learning curve. And me changing my vote was because that one particular vote that I changed was a 4-part vote. So 2 of my votes were yes, but there were 2 no's, which I neglected. I missed it. But I did not change my vote because I was copying someone else's vote. Just want to make that clear. And the other thing I want to say is that just because some of us, maybe 5 of us, it seems, want to do things a little differently, does not mean that we are in the wrong. It could be that maybe things that we want to change are for the better. I mean, that's why we all took the oath. That's why we all are here. And I just want everyone to understand that it's not so cut and dry. That's all. Thank you.
So we leave on a very humble note, I thought. She just basically said that, we're here to do the right thing. That was our oath. And I think she also gets our Drop a Mic award.
Oh, definitely.
All
Definitely.
right.
You know what? I have to tell you, I appreciated her comment because she ran a great campaign. She made a commitment to her constituents and she plans on honoring it. So good for her.
Yeah. So the next board meeting is Monday, January 30th, 2023, regular public meeting, Ramapo High School auditorium. And I really, really, really hope they will fix this audio problem because this was painful.
Oof, it was brutal. Anyway, thanks for joining us and we'll see you next time.
Bye-bye, everyone.